This is a good film. Booksmart. Have you seen it? Really fun. But then there's also Lady Bird. Have you seen that? It's quite good. And I want to talk about them in the context of the High School movie. What's the deal with that? This is a new series called What's the Deal with That? I'm kidding. So, High School movies. So this is more or less an improvised video essay, but it's all for me based around the main theme of relatability. When you're watching a high school film, outside of the cringy aspect of potentially bad acting from child actors and and all that stuff, there's the aspect of, oh yeah, I remember when I had that kind of experience or this and that, which I think is mostly what most high school films are trying to go off on, which is fair enough. Booksmart and Lady Bird both are very similar in that aspect. They've got very relatable characters, relatable aspects to it. Carsten Runquist lays one of his videos recently where he talks about Lady Bird in contrast to Little Women. He mentions how the benefit of watching Lady Bird is he really relates to, obviously, the main character, who's a young 18-year-old, played by Saoirse Ronan, who she's in her final year of high school and stuff like that, and he related to that a lot. And he was even saying how, in the future he might relate more to her brother, or her mother, or, the principal, like all these other older characters as he gets older. So he might be relating less towards the main character, but more towards the older characters as he progresses in life. Whereas Booksmart is just pure crazy-ass fun, and it's so just incredible. And I think when I've watched it, I remember looking at all the reviews, and these are like reviewers who are all in their 20s to 30s to 40s and whatever, all saying how like, oh yeah, I remember when I did that kind of stuff and this and that, and they're all kind of mentioning kind of anecdotal stuff, nothing specific, but more or less just vague allusions to make them seem more relatable to the movie. And that pissed me off, because I'm thinking, how can you relate to this? It's so specific. Like, this is Booksmart in particular. I'm like, this is so specific for this age and era that I don't know how you, someone who didn't grow up with mobile phones, could relate to this. There's other stuff than just mobile phones, but like, growing up and seeing high school films as a kid before I got into high school petrified me. Outside of one of my favorite high school films, Sky High, most of them, if not all of them, which Sky High, of course, is included in this lot, is, oh, here are your main characters, they're kind of the nerdy type and whatever, and kind of the loners and the outsiders. You've got your jocks, you've got your babes, you've got the goths, and it's like, oh, high school is like all these different groups, and like, sometimes they cross over, but for the most part, they're all at war with each other. And it was like, I grew up watching parts of Glee. I didn't really like it because of the high school dynamic to it, but and also the singing and stuff, and it was a thing, it was a phase. Everyone has that phase where they're like, oh, Glee, yuck. But I ended up watching it afterwards, especially in the most recent few years, and I've come to like it more. But then with most high school stuff, it's all the click this and all about that and all about impressionability and stuff, and it gave me, it really petrified me as a kid, because I'm like, I don't want to go to a school where, especially because I was the more nerdy type, I liked video games, I liked reading, and suddenly it was going to be like, oh, I'm going to get bullied because I like to play video games and I like to read. But then at the same time, almost ironically, that most of my friends at high school, whether they were considered, in primary school, whether they were considered the cool kids or not, because again, we're fucking children, I was hanging out with a nerdier group, yes, but then I'd also hang out with people who arguably could have been considered cool kids, and I was equally in both groups. But then I was also equally friends with so many other people, and of course, because I wasn't very in primary school, I wasn't very there, that I wasn't able to really recognize the fact that, like, oh, everyone can be friends with everyone. Like, I was even friends with my bully in primary school, you know? We were pretty good friends, and it's strange to say that, because, like, you know, he was an older brother of another friend of mine, in my older brother's year level, especially. And even though he'd have days where he'd bully me, it wasn't too dramatic or anything, but, like, we still got along afterwards as if it was just all a joke. So it was like fine. I was fine with it because it was, you know, I didn't feel harmed or anything or hurt. Sometimes I'd feel scared. I'm like, oh no, he didn't hit me or anything. It was just mostly kind of like a mockery and stuff. But like, I was just like, I'm just having a laugh. That kind of crap in the end of it. And I liked that. And so getting into high school, it's like, oh no, you know, so much social pressure and anxiety and stuff like that. But then none of that happened. There's no real groups like that. Like, there were still, people had their groups because people had groups of friends. And even my dad kept going on about how in high school he would have groups of friends and he'd be like, oh, you know, I was in the music band group, but then I'd go and hang out with the nerds and then I'd go play football with the jocks. You know, he'd even do like the air quotations because even in Australian high school, that's what they would call each other, even though most people were friends with other people because if you haven't realized, most people are equal, if not all people are equal. So there was that obvious distinction. So when I got into high school, there wasn't really much of that. We didn't, at least from my experience, we didn't really get into groups of potentially the nerds and stuff like that until like, you know, year 9 and year 10 when we were more defined as to who we were, who we wanted to hang out with. But then by that stage, you knew a lot more of the people. So by year 9, I was probably considered, was hanging out with the group that we called ourselves the nerds just for fun. And then I'd go and hang out with this other group of people, and then I'd go and hang out with that other group of people, and they wouldn't be nerds, and they wouldn't be nerds, and they wouldn't really all connect to each other because, like, you know, the nerds had video games we'd play on Steam at night, like Garry's Mod or, you know, Dota 2 and stuff like that. Or we'd have Magic the Gathering or Minecraft. But then my other group would be like, no, we're just going to hang out, and sometimes they go to parties at nighttime and stuff like that at each other's places, whatever. I wouldn't always go because it wasn't always my thing, but then there would be another group who would be doing this whole other thing. Maybe they were more music focused, and they'd be hanging out in the music room playing music and stuff. And like that was just kind of how it was. So then we get to my last 2 years of high school, where everyone's so pressured with exams and stuff, and especially year 12 for me, I just didn't care. And just suddenly was just like, it was just being a breeze. I focused on other stuff and I didn't really care. So I think I have to some distinction a element of I don't get this pressure that these movies are trying to depict. And the movies, especially Booksmart, is like, actually really both Lady Bird and Booksmart have this element of not just the high school experience, because Booksmart is set over the period of a night, whereas Lady Bird is set over the period of a year, which I think is what I dislike more about it, because it feels more like a montage of a film, rather than a film that gives itself time to breathe, which is budgetary restrictions and all this other stuff, so it's fine how it goes. But it's also intentionally telling a story over a long period of time, and how it affects the characters around it and all the drama that happens and stuff like that. And I can understand the relatable aspects to it, but there's things that for me I don't connect with, and I think it's because I have this disconnection with American high school, because I grew up thinking American high school was this group and then that group and then that group and then that group, but then I also didn't know what, you know, all the school systems, like, you know, you got middle school, you got high school and all that kind of stuff, because in Australia, when you get to high school, it's year 7 through to year 12, then you graduate and you go to university. But then it's like, oh, in America, we've got like 3 different stages. You've got like your sophomore year and stuff like that. Like, they use all these words and phrasings, which are probably mostly Greek and stuff. I didn't understand. I still don't really care much about it, so I don't try to understand it, because it's like, it's not so obvious to me. Like, I don't know what this means. Like, you say you're in that year, but I don't know what year that is. Like, it's not like they're clearly saying, oh, I'm in year 12 or grade 12. They're like, I'm in this section of my high school period. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? So that's one of the disconnects for me. But also there's just the aspect of this pressure to get into something bigger with your lives. Like, oh, I have to make sure I do this and that and get all these classes done and get all these high scores and worry about all this point system and stuff. For us, we had the ATAR. Shitty, dodgy as fuck system. But we also, that was your main opportunity to get into university, but you also have folio stuff. So if you do, like, say, photography or media or arts subjects, you can do a folio, present that for a particular, class to get into or course to get into for university, and you can get in by that either. I got in both ways. I'm not going to talk about how I got into university, but at the same time, I went for both options because it was just there. It was present. I had both to go with. So in other words, I forced myself to do exams. Didn't really need to because I could have gotten in with a folio, but I chose the ATAR one instead, which I'm totally fine with because I've met my friends out of it and I've had a happier life, probably. 4 years of uni instead of 6 years, for example. So my bank account is a lot happier. But there was also that thing of, like, I didn't really have much pressure into what university I was going to get into. It wasn't, I have to go across the country to be at Harvard, or I have to go to the East Coast to be in, Stanford, or whatever these big-ass, universities that they have. And I think that's also, even though Australia is huge, and so is the USA, huge, the geography of these two nations are very vastly different. Because Australia is like, you got a small pocket in Victoria, you got a small pocket in Sydney, mostly towards the coast, same as Queensland, same as the Northern Territory in Adelaide and Perth. You may have towns throughout it, but it's mostly desert and grassland. You don't have much else. So I don't have to worry about, like, I want to go to this university, it's an hour and a bit via train. Oh, that's easy. My way to uni is just an hour. It takes me an hour to get to uni via train. It's so easy. But in America, it's like, oh no, if I want to go to a really good school, I have to fly across the country. I'm like, dude, what the fuck? So that's also a disconnect for me. So I think when it comes to a film like Lady Bird, for example, I don't feel as connected to it, mostly because of so many aspects to it. I don't have the small town vibe stuff that they have. I don't have the, because I lived in a suburb that was surrounded by suburbs that was surrounded by suburbs, and suddenly look, it's a city. Half an hour train ride to get to the city. Not too hard. Not so disconnected and dispersed. Even though it's a big country, the cities are very compact. And I like that about, especially Victoria and Melbourne. I like that about it. But they don't really depict that kind of stuff in American films, especially high school films. And then there's also, like, there's so many aspects of the high school film that they try to depict, especially, say, Lady Bird, how it's like, she's in her final year and she wants to get into the band, like, she wants to do the musical stuff, but then she also wants to do that stuff. But then they've also got the periods of the year is different. Like, we have from January 1st to December 31st is one whole year of school, whereas America has it like, we start in the second half of the year and that's our first year, but then the first half of the next year, it's so confusing how time works in America. Do you guys know what time is? I know it's a concept and not really real, but at the same time, it is. And I don't know what the hell you guys are doing. Maybe it's just because you guys have a nightmarish winter, whereas we don't. We get summer holidays. You guys get winter holidays. We do get winter breaks, but, like, we don't get it, like uni in particular, we get winter breaks and summer breaks. But America seems to be, with its high school system, it's like, oh yeah, that wintry part of the year? Yeah, nah. Summer, because it's summer break for you guys, is in, like, for America, is in it's in winter for us. So we go to school when you guys are out summer breaking. It's just so absurd. And that's why it confuses me, because it's like, now you guys are done for a year, because you can go into summer break. And it's like, but then that's 1 year of school, but then you start in, like, October or something, and it's like suddenly it's the new year of high school. You're suddenly now in year 10, even though 6 months beforehand, 3 months beforehand, you're in year 9. I don't know what it means. It's so confusing. And it's like, I get it. It's because of how the seasons work and stuff, and whatever. It's all very backwards. You say we're backwards, but at least I think we've got a more straightforward system. We do it all in 1 year. 2017, I did 1 year of uni. I didn't have to wait for the second half of the early half of the next year to finish the first year of uni, Same as year 12 was 2016. Did it all in 2016. So there's obviously that relatability disconnect that I have, which is, of course, a problem. And I think then it really comes down to which one I prefer in terms of narrative of film and how it depicts the high school experience. Now, Booksmart, of course, focuses more on the, oh, we've been studying and working hard for the whole entire year, for our whole entire high school life to get into a good university. Twist is, everyone else has also gone to really good universities, but they've been polite to not tell anyone, whatever. But then our main character finds out on the last day, before the next day, which they graduate, and it's like, oh wow, you guys have gone out and partied and done drugs and gotten drunk and all that kind of terrible stuff, and have hence, have still done really well in school. And one of the characters even says, like, yeah, I did really, like, it's like, I can't quote particularly, but they pretty much, the gist is, yeah, they're good at doing blowjobs, but they're also good at school. Like, she's also good at math, so she got into a good university. And then she follows up by saying how, like, you guys focused your whole entire time of school and only cared about school, whereas we didn't only care about school. They cared about having a fun social time. So the whole point of Booksmart is these two people who have buried themselves in their work so much that they're like, okay, we've got one night to at least say that in high school we've went out and partied and stuff. And so that's what they do. That's why it takes place over at night. It takes place from the start of that last day to the end of the next day. And they just go out and try and party and experience that kind of a life that they never were able to experience because they thought that was a bad idea. Because they thought that it would distract from their school and they'd get bad marks and wouldn't get into a good university. And so I can understand that element to it. And I think that's why I maybe prefer Booksmart more. But of course, I think because of the generational gaps, I don't like how other people who are much older than me are saying, oh, I can relate to that and whatever. It's like, but can you? Like, I can't specifically relate because I don't even remember most of my year 12 because I just didn't give a shit during the year. I focused on filming stuff for YouTube and I made sure I passed my classes and hung out with my friends. And most days of hanging out with friends during lunchtime and recess was, hey, let's play Foursquare. And it was pretty boring. Because everyone was so stressed about exams and stuff, and I was the only one who just didn't give a shit. Or at least I think I was the only one who didn't give a shit. I did my own thing. I enjoyed it. I don't remember most of it, but it's just because it was just kind of meh. So I didn't have that tension. I didn't have that, oh, let's go out and party fight, because I didn't go out and party in year 12, but at the same time, I didn't need to. I had my own ways to experience my life. I already knew what I liked to do. I liked to film. I liked to edit. I liked to hang out with friends by mostly playing video games with them. I didn't need to go outside and go to parties. I had heaps of friends who did, but I didn't. And by that stage in my life, I think I wasn't even being invited to parties, so it didn't really matter. I had that kind of phase in year 9 and year 10 where I'd be invited out to parties, but that was before you even had alcohol kind of stuff, so it wasn't the realer parties that you get probably once you are able to start drinking. And I think that's why I'm probably not bigger as an alcohol person as well. So that's a fun fact. So there's that kind of element that I don't completely relate to, but I like Booksmart because I understand what the characters are doing, and I understand and can kind of relate enough to not going out and partying all the time and experiencing that fun life. Even though I had my own thing, I'd go and watch films, I'd go watch TV, I'd hang out with a broad range of friends, both in school and outside of school. I'd be filming this and filming that instead of doing homework or that kind of stuff. So that was my kind of, oh, look at me, I'm not doing my homework, I'm doing other stuff. And that was the best I had in terms of that contrast. And that's why I prefer Booksmart as a film, because I find that more relatable. But I also just find it to be a much more fun film because it's like a living meme. It's so of this generation that it's just past me getting out of high school, because this is like a 2019 thing, whereas I got out of high school in 2016. So it's funny how in 3 years so much has changed. But this is also America, so it's already going to be a lot is different. Because if there was a film that had come out in 2016 that was about high school in 2016, maybe I'd be able to relate to it, but probably not as much. Even if it was Australian focused, I don't think I would be able to as much relate to it. And then we get to Lady Bird, which I still think is a really good film, but I don't relate to it as much, and I don't think it's as enjoyable to watch. I think I actually only gave it I really liked it on my first viewing when it first came out and first saw it in theaters, but I watched it recently, and I liked it, but I didn't really care much, because I'm like, the montage aspect, like I even in my review, I said that it just feels like a long montage, like a 90-minute long montage of just things, which is fair enough. It's what they were going for narrative wise, and I can understand that. But it just feels strange to watch. But I think it's also because I have such a disconnect because I can't exactly always relate to everything that's happening, and I think that outside of it being a specific experience for the character, which of course not everyone can relate to, that's impossible. But because it seems to be such a specifically American thing, like, for example, let's compare it to Euphoria, which obviously came out in 2019, is set in 2019 with a 2019 generation. And they've had their effect. Like, this is the social anxiety generation that's being propelled from 9/11, and the result of that, and what their anxiety from their parents has driven the kids into their mindsets of. And Lady Bird is set the year after. It's set in 2002, so it's set just after 9/11. So it's that kind of experience, but they're not really detailing it too much, but it's the obvious, the world has changed, you know? So now things are different. We have more things to be scared about, but we also, this isn't a war of the worlds, is it the terrorists kind of deal. It's just like, we're still trying to cope and live, but there's so many other things that are out there that we're having problems with. Now, there's of course the aspect that they're both poorer families and stuff like that in Lady Bird, so there were a lot of different aspects that I obviously cannot relate to. But with the whole dynamic of the high school experience, I mean, I can't even really say that I relate more to Euphoria, but at the same time, they both have that kind of balance that I can find it enjoyable and really well made, but I can't always relate to the experiences that they're going through. Of course, with Ladybird, you don't have the social media generation as strongly as you do now, so that's why it feels so strangely connected. So it feels more like my primary school years of not having Facebook, and of course, because it is set in 2002, and by 2005, I started primary school. And so Euphoria is more, oh, hey, it's 2019, we've got, sex and drugs and social media and stuff like that, and a whole new wave of nightmare. And I think they're really good things to watch kind of back to back, and kind of the character dichotomy and how everyone's life experiences can change, like within just a 15-year bracket, how life is in one place and how life is in another for two different generations of people. But overall, my relatability towards both is kind of null and void. I don't relate to the drug heavy and party heavy existence of Euphoria, but I can appreciate the artwork that has been presented to me. Whereas Ladybird, as much as it has the religious aspects as well, which I had in earlier primary school, I don't really relate to that, but at the same time, I understand it enough because I grew up with it, so I don't, that's not really my problem. It's more or less just the whole experience just doesn't feel as relatable to me. Can't always feel exactly, can't always put myself in the place of the main character. Though it's still a really well done story, and obviously people can still relate to it more strongly, it doesn't always connect with me. I don't think it's even a gender thing. I think it's just my own personal experiences are not enough to connect well enough. And sometimes you don't have to connect your own personal experiences with a film, but at the same time, it's a high school film set in a realistic film. It's a realism level film, It's not trying to do something a little bit different or a little bit extra. It's basing things in the real world, and I can't always relate to that in terms of my real world experience versus the real world experience in the film. And that's disappointing. And even though I think the film is quite, this is Ladybird, I still think it's a really good film. I just don't always connect to it. And I guess it was also like that mother-daughter aspect that I don't always connect with. And I think it's mostly the main character and her experiences that I really just don't always connect with. And I guess I could say that I'm trying to say that through my experiences, I can't connect with it. It might be that other people can connect with it, but not through experience, but through like maybe location and stuff like that. So there's also that aspect of that kind of disconnect. There's also the time period, but then someone, again, Carsten, for example, is able to connect with it, yet I can't, even though we're basically the same age, So I think he's like 2-3 years older than me. So it's strange. I think there is obviously the cultural difference between America and Australia, and how time works just in general. But that's what I sometimes feel when it comes to high school films, and why I'm not always big on watching them, because I can't always connect to that aspect. And I know watching films isn't always about connecting to characters, but experiencing what they experience through their own eyes. But when it's something so real and that can be considered so close to the heart, because most of us have experienced the high school experience, I should at least be able to in some way connect to the film, but most of the time I can't. Booksmart, I can understand it, can't always connect with it, but I do definitely understand it, and I think I pretty much connect with it quite well. Whereas Lady Bird, I just don't, and I think that's more of a American context and American time period context, both how the school year works for them, but also, I don't even know, is it set in 1 year or 2 years? I don't know, it's strange. And then, of course, there's the whole post 9/11 world that I didn't strongly experience until well past 2010 when I found out about it, Because even though I was alive when it happened, I was I was an infant. I didn't know what the hell was going on. So, yeah. So it's obviously that whole big relatability of texture, which I think is the strongest grip for high school films. The whole idea, and that's what I like about Lady Bird too, is that it tries to be more real. Whereas it doesn't present these cliques and crews. It still has that, because that's still real world enough that, like, oh yeah, here's the more theatre group, but then, like, some of them are more of the popular kids and they'll be doing their own thing and going to parties and stuff. And so I like how Lady Bird contrasts that with her own best friendhood, and how her and her closest friends are like, yeah, we're doing our own thing, but then she wants to change and become a different person because they're all teenagers and stuff, and that's what teenagers want to do. But I guess also because I never really experienced that, and I can't always connect with it. I can understand it, of course. I'm not dumb. I see what's happening. I understand what's happening. But I think that's just the strongest thing for high school films, is that I don't always connect with them. I can't even say that there's any Australian high school films or TV shows that I connect with on a personal level of, yeah, no, that reminds me of my experience. And look, I can't say that my experience was more unique or maybe a little more boring. I think everyone's experience was realistically a lot more boring. But we all still can tell our own stories about our experiences. Like, currently, like, my girlfriend, we met in uni, so we didn't go to the same high school. She went to an all-girls school, I went to a regular public school. So we've got enough contrast of that to be able to compare. And that enough is already so vastly different for what she experienced in high school and what I experienced in high school. But yeah, overall end all be all is just that I think I may perpetually and always, especially as I get older especially, have this disconnect with high school films. And I guess I always have since I was a kid, outside of the fact that I wasn't in high school then, but there was always this cultural difference from, mostly because it's American, I just don't connect to it. So, yeah, I'd say it's disappointing, and it doesn't allow me to experience and really be in the film, but sometimes the film can be so well crafted, which I think Lady Bird is to some degree, but I don't think I'm always in it. That because some films can be so well crafted that you are just so immersed in it. And Lady Bird just doesn't do it for me. But Booksmart doesn't either. But Booksmart is so fun in terms of how it goes and how it shows you this thing, this experience, that I'm like, I can enjoy that. I can enjoy what they're doing. I don't have to connect with it. I don't have to immerse myself with it. I can just watch and enjoy what they're doing. Overall, they're both good films, though, so yeah, still recommend them. And I think that's it. That's more or less my thoughts on the high school film. This is a very long video, so that's not great. But yes, so it's a lot of thought, a lot of texture. But yeah, just the end all be alls. There's so much you can do with a high school film, where you can try to relate to your audience, where you can try to depict a specific experience. But yeah, I think for high school especially, I was more like the kind of leaf that would go through the wind and I'd get stuck to this group, then I'd be stuck to the next group, and maybe I'd go back to that group, and that kind of deal. A lot of people would probably still like that. I can't be the only one, and I probably never will be. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. So yeah, thanks for watching. I know it's been long, and hopefully I can cut it down. If not, I'll just scrap it. Haha, fun. After that, thanks for watching. I've got more video essays. Some that I like this where I just stand and talk for a bit about an idea, try to translate it the best way I can. But yeah, this has been my discussion on high school films and Lady Bird and Booksmart and Sky High. Adios.